Wow. Yeah. I understand.
All right, let me see if I can get that thing started. Okay, so let's look at the old spectrum of competition. With the show of hands, how many people are wanting to watch the debate tonight? Just curious. Everybody's bashful? Let me see, I'm just curious how many of college-age students are willing, because I don't care if you do or not. Show of hands, who's planning to watch the debate tonight? Raise your hand. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, you guys all get extra credit. The rest of you, oh, now all of a sudden the hands come out nice. That's true, yeah, you guys don't care. 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock Central. And there's no extra credit. I don't care if you watched it or not, but I was just curious if the potential fireworks of Trump and Hillary attracted more people or less people. It could be like a UFC fight, kind of. You never know. Whoever wins. Put them in a cage. This is chapter 13, yes. All right, so we started off this last week with perfect competition. Perfect competition had 3 characteristics: free entry and exit. What else? Homogeneous product. Good. Homogeneous product. Got it. What else? We got free entry. We started off with 2 homogeneous product. Drop of water in the bucket. Lots of sellers and buyers for that matter, but lots of sellers. Drop of water in the bucket. All right. Then we ran over to, or what we're in right now, is monopoly with a single seller, homogeneous product by addition, because they're the only show in town, right? And most importantly, what was the last one for monopoly? Government protection was which was an example of what it is for real. Barriers to entry in general. Yes, the government, you're just being more specific, which is fine. Barriers to entry, which could be due to government issuing a patent or some sort of rule or regulation. It could be physical harm in some markets. What type of markets might you lose a leg or an arm? What kind of markets might you lose a leg or an arm? Drugs. Yeah, drugs is a big, that's a market where some of the barriers to entry are, I'm going to shoot your kids if you come into this territory. That is a true barrier to entry, and I'm not kidding around, right? Think about that, that's a real barrier to entry. So, and of course, when that used to happen in the old days, then that's part of why we have government, is to actually remove that or mitigate that barrier to entry by making it illegal and having laws and having police presence as needed and a court system and et cetera. So we have a rule of law to keep those sorts of barriers out of there. So I just wanted to give at least one positive spin for government, since we were maybe kind of a little on them last time on whether they're creating more help than harm or otherwise, and it really depends on the circumstances. So what was the other big barrier? What was another barrier? Cost of entry. So it's really expensive. We, Savannah, that was you brought up the, you brought up the, you're the North Dakota, or Alaska, right? So we got the oil refineries, really expensive. So there's lots of industries that you just don't wake up in the morning and say, hey, I want to be an oil refinery, or I want to be an airline. Or, so, okay. So given those conditions, we have a seller who faces the whole market demand curve. That was the first thing we had going, was the monopolist, the seller, faces the entire demand curve. And because of that, what was true about the revenue generated by more units? It was smaller than the price that we could sell it at. Because if we want to sell more product, what do we have to do with our price? We have to lower it. And so if I'm selling 100 units at $10, if I'm currently selling 100 units at $10, in order to sell more, I have to price. Maybe if I drop my price to $8, I can sell 120 units. Law of demand, way back to chapter 3. But the problem, it's not really much of a problem, but the issue that the monopolist has is that they can't break these apart necessarily. So that in order to sell these extra units, I have to drop the price not only for the extra 20 units, but for all 120 units, right? And so in a sense, we gain, if we think about it this way, we gain, our revenue now is going to be 120 times 80 in our profit maximization process. We picked up this many more dollars from trying to be more aggressive, but we lost this little rectangle, right? Because we used to have 10 times 100, and now we have 8 times 120. And so we got those two things kind of offsetting each other, and so that creates our marginal revenue that is less than the price. So that was one of our key things last time. The point, marginal revenue is less than price. I lose the green area, but gain the red area. So, in this example, the marginal revenue of the next 20 units we could calculate, right? The total revenue associated with 100 units was how much? Total revenue associated with 100 units, 1,000. And now the total revenue associated with 120 units, 8 times 120, 960. Yikes. So what is the marginal revenue of each additional unit? Marginal revenue is equal to equation goggles. Marginal revenue. Not in any cost, we're just on revenue. Change in total revenue divided by change in quantity. So in this case, the change in total revenue is 40? No, that's not right. Negative 40. And so we're going to this. It actually went down, right? We had $1,000. Now it's 960. So the revenue generated by the next 20 units caused total revenue to fall by 40. But now the change in quantity was 20, which gives us $2 per unit. So the marginal revenue was $2 negative. over this range. Now, just to hopefully motivate this a little bit more, if this would have been 12, don't put this on your paper, by the way, right now. If this would have been 1200, just a simple stroke of the pen, marker. Now, what to do? So what's the total revenue associated with 1200? I get 8 times 1200 equals, I got 0, 0, 16, 9,600, right? 960, 9,600. And so what is the marginal revenue now going from 1,000 to 9,600? I get 8,600 over the incremental number of units, which was 1,100, right? And that equals, what do we got here? 8,600. Oh, you got a calculator. Lauren's got one. 8,600 divided by 100. Yes?
Oh, sorry.
You're inside, outside voice now.
I'm sorry, 7.81.
7.81, is that what you guys got? Other people that I heard some other people calculating? So my marginal revenue is now positive. What's the difference in what I just did with those calculations? I didn't want you to put this 1200 on here because I'll fix this up in a little bit, but what did I essentially do to demand, changing this from 120 to 1200? I made it more elastic, yes. I mean, in theory, what I really did was I did this, right? And this comes all the way out to wherever 1200 would be. I took the demand curve and I just fudged and did that. But really what would be is that. And so if you want to edit your papers, you could draw some sort of flatter curve out here. And then just make this go to 1200. Just kind of, you don't have to have it perfectly down, but 1200. You just created a more elastic response to the demand curve. All right, so being a single price monopoly means we have to cut price in order to sell more. That's our central concept so far with this. All right, questions on marginal revenue? All right, so that led to our basic monopoly curve, kind of the home base for monopoly. And draw some sort of demand curve. It doesn't have to come down and touch, but that makes it kind of nice to then draw the marginal revenue curve. Because the marginal revenue curve bisects the horizontal axis, so it's right in the middle where that comes down, and then just connect the points, and you got your marginal revenue curve. And we did one other picture with relating that to total revenues last time.
Did you say that it actually connects to the other graph?
So over here, if the units are really close to the horizontal axis, we showed this last time that it's basically intersecting at the top, at the same spot as that. And so the demand curve and marginal revenue curve, it cuts through the bottom here. In other words, this is something I didn't give you last time that we can note. It's twice the slope. Twice the slope. What was your question though, Paige? Did I answer it or not?
No, like the other, like that graph.
Over here?
Yeah.
Okay. Over here I didn't draw it in intentionally, but it would be coming down like this. And so at this point, here, I'll show you. At this point, the revenue generated by this unit was a negative $2. So it would have been right here, And I'm almost close, aren't I? Look at that. Even just kind of hodgepodging it. If you take the half, go like that. See what I mean? So the marginal revenue of the 120th unit was -$2. So it does drop below. Any other questions? Okay, so you might see this on some of your homework problems or tests. The marginal revenue for a single price monopolist, marginal revenue is twice the slope of the demand curve. It's twice as steep. And that's why we're able to do that little trick that I did, because if this intercept here was 100, then this is going to be 50. And if this was $1,000 price tag, rise over run, down 1,000, over 100, slope is 10, negative 10. And then the slope of the marginal revenue curve, down 1,000, over 50, -20. Right? So it's twice the slope, twice the steepness. All right, any questions there? So, the monopolist cannot avoid the law of diminishing marginal product and therefore faces an upward sloping, increasing marginal cost, as we saw on our test. And by now, you should know where we're going with this. Erasmus? That's right. Erasmus? Am I pronouncing that right? How does firm maximize profits?
I don't know.
Ashley, how does firm maximize profits?
Producing the quantity were generated by the last unit produced is equal to profit the last unit.
Excellent. Erasmus, how does a firm maximize profits?
The project quantity where the revenue generated by the last unit produces is equal to the cost of the last unit.
Excellent. All right. So, produce the quantity where the revenue generated by the last unit is just equal to the cost of the last unit. That goes on right. Bingo, there. The cost of this unit is that. The revenue generated by this unit is that. Marginal cost equals marginal revenue at this quantity. Let's call it this quantity, or QM. The monopolist is going to charge the highest price people are willing and able to pay for that quantity. The demand curve, fortunately, has that information. So I go up to the demand curve, hang a left, and this shows the highest price people are willing and able to pay for the good. So we got price and quantity in the monopoly setup. Questions so far there? In order to calculate profits, it's awfully convenient to have the average total cost curve up there. And so it doesn't really matter where you put it too much. I drew it down here before, but it could be there. I'm going to today draw it kind of in between here and put it right here. The big fat dot, remember it bottoms out, average total cost. It always intersects the marginal cost curve at that minimum point. So now the monopolist can determine the average total cost per unit of producing the profit maximizing quantity by going up to the average total cost, right, Lance? Hang a left. Lance helped us out with this one last time. Read off that number. And now I've got enough information here to show graphically the profit. What's the profit equation? Equation goggles. Profits equal total revenue minus total cost. So we can use the average total cost curve if we want to break down that equation a little bit further, we know that price times quantity gives us total revenue. I've got a quantity, I've got a price, there it is, that rectangle. Price times quantity minus total cost, which we can think of as average total cost per unit times the number of units. That's this rectangle. And now if I take this rectangle minus this rectangle, get this rectangle. And that represents the economic profit for the monopoly. All right, so the signal's on. What does the signal attract? Other companies. Enter me, enter me. But the problem with monopoly is there's a barrier. There's that piece of glass behind the light. Ding, 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 ding. All the little flies come in there and they find some barriers to entry. And so the prediction that we make in economics is that these profits are likely to last, both in the short run and the long run. If you're calling the shots, then they're likely to be persistent due to the barriers to entry. Okay, so one of the issues with monopoly is, do we need government to protect competition? Do we need government to protect competition? Okay, in what case?
Like the EpiPen?
Like the EpiPen. So did we need the government to protect competition with EpiPen?
I didn't know that there was.
Yeah, it happened to, okay, so good. Jordan, what were you saying? Right. So we kind of have to ask ourselves, why is there not competition? And what is the reason with the EpiPen, since you brought that one up? The government. What? So I thought the government was here to protect competition, but they've maybe created it in that particular case. In that particular case. Now, some of you guys brought up big oil and big railroad last time when we were kind of brainstorming monopoly. Did we need the government to break up those monopolies? Okay, yeah, why? You know what? I guess you got to think, how did they get so big, so powerful? And we can have kind of it's almost a theoretical discussion on whether they deserve to keep what's theirs, but yeah, they did. They went through kind of a buying spree and kind of acquired other railroads because there was a lot of economies of scale going on in that industry. What's economies of scale again? Economies of scale. Good. As quantity goes up, and just one little clarifying what you said, Dylan, long run average costs fall. So it's a long run concept, economies of scale, that as you increase the scale of production, you drive down average costs. So in other words, the bigger you are, the cheaper you can produce it on average. And so that kind of fits with the railroad, right? I can't imagine those train engines are very cheap, right? We talked about the oil refineries. The railroad probably has something similar going on, right? Laying all that track, acquiring the land and how to get stuff from point A to point B. In a market system that protects private property, the railroad had to go in and negotiate with each one of those landowners for the right to have their railroad cut across their farm ground, which obviously would inconvenience them quite a bit. So they tried their best to maybe run along property lines so that Farmer Ted and Farmer Dick didn't have their land totally cut up, but that wasn't always possible in every case. And so they tried to run through maybe the property line. They still had to buy it either way, but at least they weren't cutting up somebody's farm ground. Matt? Yeah, so that's the way the government goes about acquiring it, and that's a controversial topic as well. So there, long story short, we try to preserve people's private property as much as we can, and so before the government can just come in and take your land and say, hey, I'm taking it, there has to be go through a market process to determine that why are you taking it. It's supposed to be pretty specific that it's serving the public good. And so where this has come up, the controversies come up in the last 20 years or so when I was involved with real estate is you get into some communities where there's slum and blighted property is what it's called, you know, when the houses are run down and it's a real eyesore, and a developer wants to come in and build a new mall or something. But then there's some owner that doesn't want to sell for whatever reason. Well, my family's had this house for 100 years and I ain't moving. And maybe that house is decent looking with the rest of the neighborhood, you know, pretty trashed. Does the government case, can they force that landowner to sell? Not in some people's eyes. That's where it gets really sticky, is whether they have the right, because it's really just to make things prettier. Are we really serving the whole public good for that? You know, whereas you make a railroad or an interstate argument where you've got more than a select group of people served, because in the example I gave you in the city, that might really just be serving some people in that particular area. It's not serving maybe the broader good necessarily. So it's difficult for the government to do that, and God bless America. I think that's good, because I don't want every single politician who has an idea in their head, oh, wouldn't this be great if the government owned this or did this, or help my buddy who's a real estate developer do this, help Trump do this, or whatever. That wouldn't be a good situation to be in a free market system that hopefully believes in private property owned by people. So part of what we have going for ourselves in the United States is the notion of private property, which is kind of when we started this class thinking about the spectrum of governance, right? That you've got this capitalism, socialism, communism. Communism being more strictly government owns most of everything. Socialism being somewhere in between, where the government owns a lot of the big industries. Oil, for one, is a big one around the world, that the government owns all the oil. And then finally, closer to the United States, where we pretty much let individual owners have it. We recognize companies as corporations of collections of people that can own property as well, but it eventually trickles down to individual non-government ownership of things, and land being one of those things. So, and it's partly because we recognize the gains of people being engaged in voluntary trade, not involuntary. So eminent domain is a very involuntary process. Because otherwise the people, they wouldn't have to do eminent domain if somebody volunteered to sell it, I guess is kind of the short of the story. Eminent domain ends up being taking it by force. That was probably a way longer answer than I needed to get into, but it's an important one, because that is the type of thinking I want you guys to come out of this class with. If you're listening to the debate tonight or years down the road, like, what does it mean? You know, why should we have a certain policy that is doing something this way, or would it be better to think about it this way? You know, what are the trade-offs with that? Okay. Any other questions, comments there? Kind of lost track of where I was. Let's see. Do we need the government to protect competition? So we got the mobster thing that I brought up, right? That was a little bit bigger in the 19th century and the 1800s, where we got that coming into the early 20th century and the 1900s with Al Capone and the likes of people running illegal type stuff. You know, what's the harm in running a little bit of booze across the state line? Well, the people who are doing it legally aren't getting maybe their fair share, and the government's missing out on some tax opportunities. That's similar to what we talked about with pot. So, do we need to protect competition? Is it something that we need to do? The latest thing was Bayer and Monsanto, which I think I brought up one time. You guys know those companies? What's Monsanto known for?
Insecticide.
Yeah, insecticide. Yeah, they do the stuff that kills. Like I think Monsanto is responsible for Roundup. I'm pretty sure of that. I'm not 100% sure, but you guys know what Roundup is?
Yeah.
Pretty much spray it, whatever you spray it with, it's gonna die. Whether it's good grass or whether it's weeds, you gotta be careful with your Roundup because you can burn up a lawn. So Monsanto, I think, developed that type of stuff. A lot of agricultural related goods over the years, so a huge global company. And then Bayer, what does Bayer do? B-A-Y-E-R. That's the aspirin, yeah. So they're a pharmaceutical company. So, and a huge one at that. Bayer aspirin's been around for a long time, and they get into other sorts of drugs. So we've got chemicals to kill things and drugs to help do things, and so we're going to mix those two companies together in one big global giant. And so that is under review right now by the antitrust folks for the United States government. The two companies have come to terms with each other. Bayer and Monsanto have done a deal. They have it inked on paper. They're ready to sign. They've got all their shareholders, everything's ready to go. But now it's going to go into the U.S. courts, and the government needs to give its blessing as to whether they're going to allow this merger of two companies. And some of the pros and cons they're going to weigh is, does this make this company get too big that ultimately they might be able to do this, right? So remember last time, some of our outcomes that we had is that the quantity is being restricted relative to the competitive solution, right? So the competitive in this monopoly model, marginal benefit, marginal cost, right here. So the allocatively, I'm not going to draw it today, you should have it in your notes from last time, but the allocatively efficient solution was right here, and the monopolist was back here. Reduce quantity, jack up the price, make some money. Good old-fashioned econ, right? Pull back, kind of control the market. If Bayer and Monsanto do that, is it going to lead to a less competitive environment, or is it going to be just, well, that they can do this, there's still potential for some competition. Being that much bigger, they'll have kind of some synergies, and they'll be able to be more competitive on price. So a lot of this might come down to what's going to happen with the price of their products. Do we believe that they're going to be more competitive, or could there be some potential for long-run outcomes that aren't so hot? Kendra? Yeah. Yeah, one big mega company, yeah. Well, and see, that's where I'm not sure. Apparently, there must be some good, there's a couple different words for it, but I kind of call it synergy, where the resource base that they use for let's say the research and development team, right? So you've got some chemists, you got some people who, try to kill off plants and do other agricultural pesticides, and then you've got people who are trying to create drugs that make people healthier. Well, there's some people there that could probably cross-pollinate with each other, and maybe we can be more efficient and more effective with our labor force, potentially. They could all be concentrated in one geographic location is another possible. I'm just dreaming up some stuff of where there maybe could be some cost effectiveness by having the two combined.
I worked at a vet clinic, and Bayer makes the insecticide tags for the cattle, the flies, so that would be one place they'd overlap.
So there is some insecticide with cattle. Yeah, I mean, these are huge companies, multi-product. By the way, I didn't mention this before because I like to make sure we really understand economies of scale, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but we call that economies of scope. Instead of economies of scale, we have economies of scope. So with economies of scope, we have multi-products like Bayer and Monsanto. And so by being able to combine the two companies together and have more product offerings, they're able to lower the long-run average costs for all of those goods. In other words, it's easier for them to combine and bring costs down by having more product offerings. That's called economies of scope, which we'll touch on later since you brought it up, and it's a good link to that particular case. They must believe that there's economies of scope available, would be my guess. Okay, other questions or comments? Good. So antitrust laws is the government way of fighting. So currently, the example, let me just put, we'll probably come back to this. This is a good case to watch, Monsanto and Bayer. One of them, another example, we established that Microsoft is kind of got some monopoly power. Remember, I hesitate because Microsoft does have competitors, but they're just so small relative to the overall market that Microsoft controls. And so if we define Microsoft's product as its proprietary product, it does kind of fall line here with these things. If we define the product to be basically their product. Otherwise, it's kind of cheating. I wouldn't, in the purest sense, I wouldn't call Microsoft a true monopoly. But if we define their product as the only product that's quite like that, and there's not a lot of substitutes, then we can kind of loosen that definition a little bit. So my example number 2 would be Microsoft and Internet Explorer. Now, you guys might not be too young to remember this issue. I can't, honestly, I'm maybe getting too old because I can't remember how many years ago this was. But does anybody remember Microsoft being a little bit in trouble because what they were doing with their search engine and their Windows product? We already established that Windows is kind of the top dog, right, for operating systems. What do you remember the case? Does that ring a bell for anybody? You might have looked at it, might be your history book for crying out loud in high school now, but what would be a good idea if you had control of the operating systems? What might be a good idea from a software perspective when new computers come on the market, these new Dells, the hardware made by different companies, so there's no problem with monopoly power there. What might be a good idea for Windows? You can only get Internet Explorer, and it wasn't quite that blatant. So they could have hard-coded it to say, our operating system only works with Internet Explorer, basically forcing you to use Internet Explorer. They didn't do that, though. But what do you think they did that was softer touch than that? But you're on the right line of thinking. What else might be a good idea for Microsoft to do when computers come out? They didn't force you. It was already downloaded. What's that?
And install the software.
Install the software, right. So they made it really easy for you, right? So it came free, loaded on there. And so somehow they kind of hooked you, either free or a really low price, like introductory price. And you know how most of the people who buy computers, they're like brainlessly setting it up. Do you agree? Yes, yes. Do you want Internet Explorer? Of course I do. Yes, yes, yes. And so Chrome, Google came along and said, that's not right. They have too much control to be teeing up their other product like that. I want my product to be at least in a fair position, if you will, with them, so that maybe force Microsoft to make sure Google is an equal product offering somehow when you pull up that computer for the first time. What do you use for your search engine? We've got this available, this available, this available, this available, right? Or some sort of rule. So they thought that was unfair, that they were able to exert their power that they had in the market to then take over some other markets that otherwise could have been competitive. And so these antitrust laws are on the books so that companies have the opportunity to challenge that. So in some cases, the government might bring it forward, but typically it would be another company or another person saying, hey, that's not right. I'm going to sue you under the antitrust laws that says you're exerting too much power. And then they go to court. And that one stayed in court for a long time. I can't remember. Might have been 6 years or more. And I think Microsoft had to make some concessions in the meantime. So that is part of the government's role here in trying to protect competition. So in some respects, one role to protect this is just to have good laws on the books, right? That allow another company to sue another company. We take that for granted all the time in the United States, that we have these systems in place. The fancy word that economists put on there is institutions. We have institutions in place of a court system so that you can file a complaint and sue because the law of the land says you're not supposed to be able to do that. Go to other countries around the world and you don't have anything even close to that. And what it is many times the people running the country are kissy-faced with big companies. And that's the danger. I think one of the biggest dangers we have in the United States today is having too much of that. So if we can get back to preserving a rule of law that supports competition, we can be in a lot better place. Okay, any other questions there? Let's see. So, let's do price discrimination next. Since we're talking about laws and rules, we're going to talk about discrimination. Ooh. Is discrimination illegal in the United States? Kinda, yeah. So the classic college answer, it depends, right? Might be a good one for discrimination. Yes?
Used to put on the news, somewhere had Muslim get out of the USA, something like that.
I didn't hear that one, no. So they had a sign
And
posted?
it had like, they're special, and then underneath it, it said Muslim get out of the USA.
Wow. So what was the result? Did they?
Some woman went in and like tried to like tell them to take it down, and they were like, no, we're not gonna take it down, it's our sign. Yeah, that's our sign.
Wow. So, I mean, that might fall under a couple things. So what happens with some of the discrimination like that is, first of all, it might be legal. You have to go back to the protected classes. So Muslim is what? Skin color, a new phone, or a religion, or a gender? Religion. Oh yeah, religion. Is religion a protected class? Is religion a protected class?
Yes.
Can businesses restrict customs according to religion? No. So that one is illegal. Though that company's facing probably some stiff penalties because there are laws on the books. They're not the antitrust laws, but anti-discrimination type laws where they can't do that if they're wanting to run a business. So now there's another part of that where it might not be so obvious, and that is if you are and I'm not any sort of expert on this, but if you're inciting a riot, like yelling fire in a theater, that's against the law too. And so if you're inciting violence somehow, they might be walking the line of that offense too, even if whatever was on their sign wasn't maybe quite religious, although that one sounds pretty explicit.
Is the sign illegal, like, to have, or would it be, like, enforced?
The sign, well, I know what you're saying, yeah, so that's where it might fall under the insightful. They're not saying that they're not going to serve Muslims.
Isn't it like freedom of speech?
Yeah. No, you're right. That one could fall more under the inciting violence type of one. Yeah. Because they're not necessarily saying that. Now, obviously, they're not being too welcome to Muslims to come into their restaurant or whatever, but Yeah, so I'll let the attorneys battle that. That I can't help you with. But I can help you with a perfectly legal, sometimes exciting, and sometimes just awesome issue of price discrimination. Price discrimination. All right, so price discrimination is the act of charging different prices to different people for the same good. Charging different prices to different people for the same good. All right, so what's coming to mind for you? Examples. Military discount. Okay. Military discount. Senior discount. Quantity discount. Student discount. Okay. Other situations, maybe get away from, it sounds like we kind of fell into this discount. Yeah, we're kind of familiar with those, I get you. Now, what about some other just products that you buy where people paid different prices, but it was basically for the same good? What's that? Farm tax ID number. Okay, now that one, is that a farm discount or is it a farm, you avoid the sales tax? Yeah, I think that's a tax one. So the tax one really wouldn't apply. That kind of falls under a different reason. But there certainly could be some sort of ag discount, possibly. I know Farm Bureau, and you're not necessarily a farmer because of this, but Farm Bureau, if you go to Orscheln's here in town, you get 5% or 10%. I think it's only 5%. 5% off on Tuesdays, every Tuesday. I'm a Farm Bureau member, so that's the only time I shop at that store is on Tuesdays. So yeah. Okay, so other products though, other things that people pay different prices. Let's kind of get away from this discount idea. Different prices to different people for the same good, basically. Bargaining on what? Airline tickets for sure, yeah, right? So airline tickets, this is, I guess, all under number one. I'm not losing track here. Airline tickets. So does everybody, again, you could identify it down to the seat, but in row 21 of the airplane versus row 22 of the airplane, window seat, they're basically the same product, right? Is it possible that those two be different prices? Yeah. Okay, good. What else? What other? Well, you said negotiations. What were you thinking there? Okay, give me something specific. Good. What comes to mind? It's something that you negotiate on that people might pay. Roadside jewelry? What'd you say? Handmade stuff. So the handmade stuff, yeah, any type of flea market stuff.
One person has like better credit than the other person, they can get less.
Okay, so with the better credit thing, we're distinguishing different types a little differently. But so the reason that they're getting it might be because of their credit worthiness, which might be a little bit different. So I'd like kind of people of equal credit worthiness getting something potentially.
I mean, like a member card.
Member card, we got the membership discounts. That's kind of up on this discount level. Tia? Bidding, yeah. So any sort of, what's a big ticket item? This kind of gets into negotiations. So let me say flea market items. So you mentioned handmade stuff. I'm trying to not say garage but that might fall in. But I want items that there's lots of them, right? So if you said handmade jewelry, handmade gets maybe a little too custom, but what if it's just you've got a whole bunch of jewelry that's the same type of necklace, right? Same color, same whatever. So vehicles, yeah, cars is a Big one. Now, especially new cars. So if we look at the 2016 Toyota Celica GTS, that's a pretty sweet looking car. I used to have a Celica years ago. I didn't even know they still made them. I think they're just coming back this year, but that's a pretty outrageous looking car now. But how much do you pay? Is it always the sticker price? No, not necessarily. There might be a little wiggle room for negotiations. Insurance. How so?
Depending on how much you make, you'll buy how much you make.
Yeah, so insurance is kind of a tricky one because part of what they're doing is insuring you. It's kind of similar to the one you were just mentioning with the credit score, that the riskiness of the person is somewhat dependent on a number of factors, and so you might pay different insurance rates, but it might be because you are in a certain category.
But like some people, like their own parents' insurance, they automatically pay the less.
Yeah.
Some people aren't.
Yeah, because of the circumstances being a little bit different. I mean, you guys are touching on all areas that touch on price discrimination, but what I kind of want to stick to for starters is thinking about different prices for the same good. And so I think we're probably fine with this list so far. So what we want to do is figure out why do they do it, right? Now, what's our bottom line assumption for businesses in this chapter? What do they ought to maximize? Profit. What we want to be able to do here is show how that's profitable. How is that profitable to charge a different price to different people for the same good? So in our monopoly model, the quantity being here, remember the 25th unit, the 50th unit, the 100th unit, all of these are identical units, right? No difference. It's a homogeneous good. So there's no issues there. And the monopolist should be thinking to him or herself, boy, if I could just sell a little bit more, I could make more money, right? Because look at the marginal cost of producing this unit is this amount, and I can charge this price, right? So it's a profitable unit if we don't fall into the problem of what we did, we assumed with the single price monopolist. That's why we're making the distinction here. Single price monopolist versus multi-price monopolist, or the case with price discrimination. If I cut the price, I had to do it for the previous units that I sold. So with price discrimination, the key is I'm going to drop the price for just the marginal units sold. How can I do that? If I can successfully do that, then I'm going to pick up some extra money, right? That's the idea of price discrimination. Now, how can we do that? We've got 3 keys to successful price discrimination. 3 key ingredients. 3 keys to successful price discrimination. Number 1, you need consumers with differing demands. So you need consumers with different demand curves, different demands, different elasticities. So if we've got maybe some high-income people and some low-income people that we sell our product to, that's what we're looking for. We might not have to have every single consumer identified, but maybe we can break them into groups. Number 2, we need a legal way to separate those consumers. We need a legal way to separate consumers. So, some of the things you guys came up with here. What are some legal ways to separate out consumers? Age. Okay, now isn't there age discrimination? Yeah, Lauren?
Maybe like if somebody's an employee there, they get like a discount or something. Like,
Yeah, a discount. So how would we identify them? If you got an employee discount, let's say you work for Lowe's or something, and you get an employee discount, you can go to any Lowe's in the country, right? How would we identify them?
More like where I work, I get a employee discount. I have a little card that I have to swipe,
Okay.
and automatically makes it discount.
Okay, so they issue some sort of employee identification card, right?
Like where I work, I would usually get, I have to be on the clock, and like the only things I get discounts on are things that we pay.
During and while you're,
Oh,
you
yeah.
can't come in after hours. This is while you're on your shift.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get a food discount. So they're able to program that into the computer, though, that you get the discount if you're
It's
currently logged in.
Yeah, and it's like when I do the books,
Uh-huh.
I have to have all the receipts, and I have to say.
How much of a discount you get?
Um,
Yes. I'd have to work a deal with Lauren here to. When's your next shift? Might have to come in and get a coffee or something or some donuts. All right, so so some sort of ID, and you guys mentioned age. By the way, age for certain things you can discriminate with age. The senior coffee at McDonald's has been around for forever, so that's no problem. Student discounts. How would we figure out if you're a student or not? Student ID, right? So there's ways that we can do that. Now, is it possible to say discriminate against students? Is it possible to have an apartment complex here that doesn't allow students, for instance? Yes. Students are not a protected class. We have never talked about religion, race. Well, students doesn't fall in that list anywhere. So it's perfectly legal to discriminate against students. Now, typically it goes to your favor, though. Why do student discounts exist? What is the business in terms of separating different demands? Why is the student ID kind of convenient? How are students different than non-students? Because you're broke. Yeah, good. And so usually you don't have a lot of money, right? So we've got low income. We know that income can impact the elasticity of demand. So now we're on to something here. We can break our consumers. We've got a legal way to separate out students and non-students. And so maybe we have some possibilities there on separating them. All right. So lastly on our 3 keys is that we've got a resale issue. So no resale potential. So what sort of things do we tend to see the student discount on? Can you guys name some stores where you get student discounts? Chipotle, food, the gun guys. What else? Movie theater, right?
Like online.
Online, some stuff you might be able to get. What sort of stuff online though?
Amazon, books.
Like music. Spotify.
Okay, on Spotify they might be able to. You guys enter in your student ID for that?
No, you just use your email.
They verify it that way. Okay, so they can maybe get it that way, which might allow a professor to sneak in there potentially. The .edu. I know how that works, believe me. So why is this important? Why is this important? No resale potential of the goods. Yeah, because if the group that gets the discount has the ability to resell, then they might just become your competition, right? And so, or if you don't have a mechanism to separate them out, if you just have to say, oh, I'm a student, and they don't have student IDs or something, well, it seems like everybody that comes in here is a student. Even that old guy with gray hair with a cane walking in. Oh, I'm a student. Okay, fine. You get your discount. So if you don't have a way to separate them out, all of a sudden everybody is in the lowest price category. And basically all we've done is we've effectively dropped our price for everybody, right? So we have to be careful to do all three of these things. And we can't have this resale possibility. The reason I asked about your online, because I was curious on products. So imagine if the liquor store, for instance, here in town, we go up to Blue Sky, and there's a student discount of 20%. And so I'm innocently going up to load up for the weekend here, and all of a sudden Kylie's like, I'm like, what? And she's like, well, I see you're going in there. Would you like 10% off today? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm always looking for a deal. And so she said, well, what do you want? I'll take a case of Bud Light. All right. She goes in, gets her 20% discount, comes out, hands it to me. I get my 10% discount, win-win situation, right? So by having resale potential on the product, again, the store is unraveling the reason why they did it in the first place. It's going to work if there's resale potential, or it won't work as well. It might, in some cases, it might not totally break down, or it might break down over the long term, not just the short term. All right, questions or comments there? So those three things are needed. Let's see what this looks like. There's a couple ways to look at it graphically. Let's see. I think I'll keep that up for a second. So let's do it this way here. Graphing price discrimination. All right. Let's see. Let's put three graphs side by side with each other. We're going to go three across today. Pretty exciting. And over to the right, we've got non-students. And here we've got students. And here we've got the market. So we got big Q, little q maybe for students, little q for non-students. And we'll look at some pricing. And so let's on students here with a demand curve that's kind of steepish. I don't really care where you put it exactly, but put the demand curve there. And then the non-students, we're going to make more elastic. And then together, they're going to make up the market demand curve. So if, go ahead.
Is that what students?
Students, middle, non-students, and then the market demand curve. And the market demand curve, remember, is the horizontal sum of the individual demands. I'm not going to draw it right now, just to, I might abstract it a little bit. I haven't decided. Maybe I will. Let me just throw it out. So demand curve, I'm floating this out in space because I don't want to worry about what goes on. It's actually kind of a kinked thing going on here if we have students and non-students. So just kind of floating it out there. And so if in the market, this would have a marginal revenue curve twice as steep. So now kind of try to follow those rules here. Marginal revenue. Again, it goes below the horizontal axis, but you'll see a lot of stuff in your homework and tests that just leave it above. because that's kind of an irrelevant range actually. But twice as steep. And then another thing that I haven't done in lecture too much, but you've already seen in your homework, is an assumption of cost being maybe constant. So marginal costs, let's say, are constant right there. We know that the law of diminishing marginal product kicks in and that we have increasing costs, but sometimes to just keep the problem mathematically, they'll just assume constant cost, constant marginal cost. All right, so how this market would work is we go through the normal gyrations here of I'm going to maximize profits by producing the quantity where the revenue generated by the last unit is equal to the cost of the last unit, and I'm going to charge this price. Charge the highest price people are willing and able to pay. How many students are coming to the movie theater? How many students are coming to the movie theater currently, if this is the demand curves for students and non-students? The way I have it drawn there, how many students are coming when the ticket price is $10? None. So at a price of $10, they're like, whoa, I'd rather just smoke dope in my dorm room than go to a movie. Right? So there's other alternatives that they would like to do. So no students are coming out at 10. All right, so in other words, the market, the full market is students at this point. So if we can separate out the markets, we might be able to do better with profits. And so on your graphs now, draw with your elastic one. Again, you can kind of eyeball by taking this demand curve approximately out to here, cut it in half, maybe something like that. It doesn't really matter. And then we've got twice the steep, boom, there, kind of do something along this lines for marginal revenue, non-students. So the logic with price discrimination is to treat each group separate and charge the highest price they're willing to pay. We know that a movie, and actually this flat marginal cost kind of makes sense for a movie theater, that it's pretty consistent and probably pretty low, the additional cost of putting butts in the seats at the movie theater. And so at this marginal cost now, you can extend it across both parties, because the marginal cost, as long as we believe that the marginal cost doesn't change whether you're a student or a non-student, which might not be the case, at least my examples from renting to traditional age college students, on Saturday morning and Sunday morning, there tended to be a lot more puke in the hallways compared to the puke that was in my apartment buildings that were further off campus where it was mostly non-students, right? So in other words, the students at the margin generated more cleanup costs because of their activities that they chose to partake in. So, but as an assumption here, let's just say it's the same, okay? So, but those are the things you have to be careful of. Are they really the same? All right, so if they're the same, if the marginal cost of students is the same, then how we're going to maximize profits is to treat each one separately. And we're going to maximize profits by having this many students come at this price, which looks like we're coming in at the $6 price. And those non-students, we're going to charge more. Looks like they're getting zapped with the $12 price. So marginal revenue equals marginal cost in each segment. We're applying the same logic we did before. We're just treating them as different markets. All right, so questions on that? I'm going to give you 3 different ways to look at it that you'll see. We kind of did one here, but I'm going to erase this one. All right. So that's one way to look at it. So the key point here is to treat each market segment differently according to demand. Of course, if you can't separate them, then you're kind of screwed. You're not going to be able to do that. Case number 2, or graph number 2. So this is number one. Number 2, perfect price discrimination. I'm just going to draw one graph here. So with perfect price discrimination, we're going to charge a different price to everyone, each person individually, each unit sold. Somehow we're going to be able to get the highest price each person was willing to pay. And so this is, again, kind of a bit of a theoretical abstract that would be really kind of hard to do. But the key point here is you get the highest price. You get the highest price for each unit sold. So if this endpoint was $20, and it's 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, I'm not going to go all the way down. The first unit, the second unit, the third, the fourth, and the fifth. Let's catch up. So I just did 20 down to 15, and then corresponded that with 1 through 5 on the bottom. What is the marginal revenue generated by the 4th unit? What's the marginal revenue of the 4th unit sold? 16. Revenue that was generated by it? Right? And what's it equal to? So you're saying it's 16. So the revenue generated by the 4th unit is equal to the price. Good. What's the revenue generated by the 5th unit? 15. What's the revenue generated by the 2nd unit? 19 or 18. 19, 16. In other words, the revenue generated by each additional unit is now back to being equal to the demand curve. So it's a special case. Instead of having the downward twice the slope thing that I was doing here, the twice the slope thing, it's actually equal to it. Now, what's interesting about this is if there is a marginal cost curve in the traditional way, all firms maximize profits by producing the quantity where the revenue generated by the last unit is equal to the cost of the last unit. That's right here, Q star. what's unique about this situation in terms of deadweight loss? There is none. What's the allocatively efficient quantity? It's the same. The allocatively efficient quantity is equal to the quantity that the monopolist is producing. So we get allocative efficiency. How much consumer surplus is there? Consumer surplus. Difference between what a consumer is willing to pay and what they actually pay? Zero. There's no consumer surplus. No consumer surplus. Does that mean they're getting screwed? No, because they were willing to pay. They just paid what they were willing to pay and able to pay. So it's still a voluntary marketplace, just no consumer surplus. Who did the consumer surplus go to? The producer. The producer was able to kind of extract, if you will, all of the consumer surplus out of it. And that's what's going on with all of these price discrimination models, is the producer trying to be creative at getting people to pay what they're willing to pay. But sometimes that's easier said than done. All right, we'll pick up there on Wednesday.